motion to approve?
So moved.
Seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
Carries. At this point, we're going to jump right into public comments. Thank you very much. And let's start with, is that Sandra Freeman?
We came to listen.
Oh, that's fine.
Yeah.
That's totally fine.
So, yeah.
Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry. This next name,
That's me. That's my signature, no comment.
no comment. Okay.
So that's good.
You can read it.
Read it, but I trust.
Gary Freeman.
Okay, got it. The next is Bill Wallace, but Bill, I think you're actually on the
We're on
agenda.
the agenda under Jefferson track.
Perfect. Okay. Names here, but they're not listed for comment. Anybody have anything to say?
We're on the agenda as well. I'm just here to answer any questions y'all might have, but I don't have a public comment.
Okay. So in that case, I'm going to kick it over to Eric for a general Greenbelt programs update.
Mr. Chairman, before we get into that, just a reminder that today's meeting, as always, is being live streamed. It's on the county's YouTube channel now. And the program update will be brief because there have been a few changes since we last met in November. However, since the last meeting, we have closed on 4 projects: the Howell Avenue project, the reserve at Meggett, Jeremy Creek expansion, and the Sullivan's Island Elementary Beach Path. That grant agreement was recorded. And then we've got several closings pending, as you can see. And it looks like Pappy's Island 2 will be the first one of those to close here in the new year, coming up in the next month or so. Also wanted to update you that, as recommended, the Oak Grove Farm 2 transfer was approved by County Council, as you all recommended. And then for the current cycle, the grant application cycle that closes on January 28th, we have received 8 letters of intent so far. And with your permission, I'll jump right into the next agenda item, sir.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. That next item is the Silver Hill Plantation Conservation Easement Transfer Request. This conservation easement, funds were originally awarded to East Cooper Land Trust to conserve 21 acres under the easement for an amount of $235,000 in Greenbelt dollars. It was awarded in November 2019, closed in May of 2021, and is located in the town of McClellanville, right on the headwaters of Jeremy Creek. Low Country Land Trust and the East Cooper Land Trust are merging. East Cooper Land Trust will become a part of the Low Country Land Trust overall name, and there's no changes to the easement terms, but that's the reason for this transfer request, is that East Cooper Land Trust will cease to be in existence as its own entity in the future. So it's a simple request, transfer request from one approved eligible Greenbelt recipient to the other. And here's a map of the property. It is this area outlined in red, and there's actually 2 parcels. That's the larger one, as well as this smaller piece right here on the corner. Happy to answer any questions about that.
Well, number one, are you able to do that at the staff level, or is this going to require a formal vote?
This would require a motion
Okay.
to approve the transfer request from, to Low Country Land Trust from East Cooper Land Trust. And then per the grant agreement, your recommendation would also go to County Council for their approval as well.
Got it, okay.
Chairman. Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Great, the motion carries.
Hey, Beezer, are there others that are going to come from the East Cooper Land Trust that we own, or is this the only one that?
I was going to ask that next. Will there be others?
So getting a little more into the details, there's the East Cooper Land Trust, and there's also the East Cooper Land Trust Foundation. The East Cooper Land Trust Foundation has supported the work of East Cooper Land Trust in the past. And from what I can tell, it holds all of the fee simple Greenbelt projects. The East Cooper Land Trust Foundation will continue to be in existence. However, its board membership will change to be the same as Low Country Land Trust Board. So there's no need for a transfer from the East Cooper Land Trust Foundation properties, and this is the only conservation easement that will need to be transferred.
Oh, great, okay. All right, in that case, let's move on to the Jefferson track update.
All right, we've got Mr. Bill Wallace here, as well as Gregory Saxton with the town of Allendale. I know last meeting there was a specific request for them to present and show some photos on the property. So, Bill, if you'd like to take the microphone, I will flip through the photos that I have here, and you're welcome to speak to those. The first one we have up is the overall aerial of the property, and then the next series will be drone shots that Jen Maddow took at our last monitoring visit out there back in October, as well as some ground level shots that Bill can speak to as well to explain what's been going on out at the property.
Okay, we have some of these in our presentation as well. There'll be duplicates, but this shows primarily the 50-acre lake. The park site is a total of 300 acres plus or minus, and we have finished digging the lake and are in the process now trying to refine the edges. And now that the digging operation is finished, we're in the process of refining the master plan based on what the lake shape and size actually turned out to be.
And Bill, we were unable to upload your presentation, so all we've got to work with are the photos that I loaded.
So the whole thing is gone?
You couldn't upload it.
Huh?
And open it, but I think I've got most of the photos that you probably had in there. Here's the next photo showing the berm over to the right of that photo.
All right, the berm was built, required by the DHEC permit to do the mining operation. It was intended to be just a buffer for the neighborhood that's across the street, Bulls Bay Overlook. And the buffer, was to be removed after the mining operation finished. But decisions were made to go ahead and leave the buffer and leave the berm in place as a buffer. And we're going to landscape the front face of the berm, and then we're going to have a trail across the top of it. It's kind of hard to see, here, but there is a trail that goes all along the top of this that will be part of a trail system in the park itself. All right, this shows a view looking basically toward the west. This is the island, more or less, that you saw here. This is a piece of property, a piece of our property that was originally cleared, and this was a international paper piece of property in the past, and some of it had been cleared before we purchased it. And this piece right here was required as part of the permitting process to be restored. So we've planted over 2,000 trees in this area right here. This also shows the end of the lake where we have events such as our Blue Crab Festival and others. We use over here on this side is mainly parking, and along the edge of the lake is where we have our event space. This shows a different view looking west. This is, generally speaking, a wetland area that needed to be preserved. We have an easement, that has been recorded on this and 6 other wetland areas. Then we're going to have a trail. You can see part of it going around the edge of this, and it connects with highland back here in the back. So people will be able to get out and have access along there. And we plan on building some boardwalks and trails into here so that people can see what a wetland is, what it's intended to do. Then in the very back, this area that you see here, we will ultimately move the Blue Crab Festival and some of the other larger events back here. because behind us is the national forest. The other area that you saw a minute ago is, closer to Door Road and closer to where there are residences. So we'll still continue to have smaller events there, but the Blue Crab Festival and other larger events will be back in this space here. All right, this is just looking a little bit further to the south. We have a road that will be along this edge of the lake, and then it'll curve and go along this. This is another wetland that we preserved right here, and that's how you will get back to the space that we will have events right here. All right, this shows we planted, in addition to the 2,000 trees that we planted on the restored wetland, these are trees that we started planting along here. We planted over 1,000 trees on the berm, most of which were small seedlings. But we did plant some along the edge of the lake that were bigger, 8-foot, 10-foot trees, which you see right here. And there's a variety of trees, live oak, cypress, and some smaller understory trees like redbud and others. All right, this shows the well that we have on site to provide water to the site. And then we have power that comes in. This is Dominion Energy, goes out to Door Road. So we have power and we have water to the site, and that's basically right at the end of where the berm is located.
And Bill, that's the last photo that I have on my slides.
Well, I apologize we have a formatting problem, I guess. I have pictures, that show we built over a mile of the East Coast Greenway Trail. It's been in use for, over a year now. That trail was built using PRT money. We got $100,000 from PRT and $25,000 from Charleston County, the transportation sales tax money to build that trail. And we're just now starting on an extension of it. Ultimately, we're going to have a 12-mile totally off-road trail, in Awendaw that'll be part of the East Coast Greenway. We also built, as part of that trail, we have a parking area on Door Road and a kiosk that's very similar to the kiosk that the Forest Service builds to make it a trailhead. And we have benches that we built along the trail. We used PARD money to build those benches. We have 7 very nice sturdy benches that are there. The area where we have the Blue Crab Festival, the question was asked last time, do we use that? Yes, we do. We have a Blue Crab Festival there, which is an annual event. Generally, we have around 2,000 people that come to that. So it's a very successful thing that's been going on for basically 25 years in the town of Awendaw. We'll continue to have that there. We have other special events. Some are one-time events, some are others, more recurring. For example, the Post and Courier has an event that they call Bike Across South Carolina. They have it in a different location every year. It was at our park last year, and basically they have 3 different levels that you can do. One's a 3-day ride, one's a 2-day ride, one's a 1-day ride, where you can, based on your level and your capabilities, travel different lengths that go through our park and then out into the national forest. We also have an event there that we've had the last 2 years that is called Palmetto Relay. If you're a glutton for punishment, this is what you need to do. It starts in Columbia, and they have relay teams of 10 people or so, and they run overnight from Columbia to Awendaw. Get to Awendaw at like 6 o'clock in the morning. And that event, they have the closing, ceremonies there, and they have food and, things for the runners when they come in. We've also had things that were sponsored by the town of Awendaw. We have the Oktoberfest that we just had recently that was mainly for children, where we give out, candies and have, things like the games and inflatable, activities and things of that nature. We have a food drive that is a quarterly thing for the town of Wawanda that we've had the last two, at the park, where we give out, food from the Low Country Bank on a basis of, your need. We've also had some things there that were smaller events, like we had a walk and run fun day, which was tied to a health thing with the medical university, where people could either walk or run from town hall down to the park. And then they had things there for recreation and the refreshment at the end, as well as medical screening and things like that. So we do use the park, yes we do. We don't, and the trail, for example, is used on a regular basis. People are there, almost every day walking or biking on the trail. So we are using the park. We haven't just opened it to the general public. Mainly we're doing the events because until now we've had construction going on, and we didn't want to have people out there, mingling with construction equipment and being involved in, activities that would conflict with the construction. So we're now finished with the dredging and mining of the sand. We won't be having any more of that. So what we're doing now is we're getting to the process where we're revising our master plan. The master plan was done many years ago before we ever even, started the mining operation, and it was based on a lot of assumptions. For example, we showed you, Eric, can you go back to one of the first couple of slides, aerial views? All right here is fine. You can see in this piece of property right here, which is a wetland, in the original master plan, that was going to become an island, and we were going to have bridges over to it. That's it, right there in the middle. But this right here was going to be lake, so that the lake was more of an O-shaped lake. Now it's a U-shaped lake because DHEC and others didn't want to disconnect this, from the side across from it, so that had to remain as high ground. So things like that, are things we need to react to. And now we know, the sizes and shapes of the areas. So we're going through a process of revising our master plan. We had some public hearings. We had a thing on the park site itself where people could come and, look at the plans and make comments. And so we're incorporating all of that into a revised plan. And we will, hope to have that to you in February. If not in February, perhaps your next meeting. We have consultants who are working on that for us now. They've been working on it, for a couple of months. So we'll have a new master plan that we'll come and talk to you about once that's finished. I'll be glad to answer any questions that you may have.
Any questions for Mr. Wallace, Elizabeth?
Yeah. So, Mr. Wallace, when do you expect it will be formally open to the public?
All right, I apologize. I wear hearing aids, and it's hard for me to hear when you
y'all
have
okay
a
with
mask.
that? When do you expect it to be formally open to the public?
We're hoping that it'll probably be open next spring. If we get the master plan finished, sometime in, February or March. The East Coast Greenway portion is open to the public now. But, the entire park probably will be open sometime in the spring.
So those who want to access the trails like that can
Yes.
currently?
Right, the
Okay.
trail is basically totally separate. You can't really see it on that, but the trail starts right here on Door Road, and then it goes along our property line down to a point where there's a wetland. It bumps out and goes around the wetland, and then it comes over and exits our site right around here. Then it goes off of our property. This is a trail that the National Forest Service has that connects with that trail, and then that trail goes over, and you can either go down to where the shell ring is, or you can go up to where Highway 17 is. So our trail basically is back here. We're not doing any construction back there, so people can access that now on a daily basis.
Thank you.
Eric, did you mention you had a drone footage or something?
Oh, the aerial shots that we showed previously were taken from the
Gotcha,
drone.
gotcha, okay. Any other questions for Mr. Wallace? No?
All right, we do have some pictures that show some of the events and things, and we'll get those to Eric, and, he can distribute them to you if you want to see, the actual events themselves and what's going on. But, we use that site, and then we use the lake, like in one of the events, they had a concessionaire who had kayaks, and people were out there on the lake, in kayaks, in addition to the actual event itself.
Well,
I have one more.
okay, Jason, did you have one? Okay, Elizabeth?
Yeah, so at the last meeting, Mr. Wallace, we had some questions about the expenses.
Yes.
And this may be for Eric. You may be filling that.
I have a summary
Okay,
slide
great.
on that, and I'm
Thank
sure Bill can answer any
Okay.
questions after I run through that, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
All right. So yeah, right just before the last meeting, we were made aware that there were a significant increase in expenditures from the mining proceeds to the tune of $113,000, and staff didn't really have time to dig through those, but we did have an idea that some of those may be ineligible. And after going through those, if you read the special condition at the top, it talks about the proceeds from the sale of dirt need to be used to fund improvements on the property. Well, what we found was that $46,073.83 were spent on things that we felt were recurring operations, maintenance, and then legal fees associated with the arbitration. We deemed those ineligible. The town has been working with us on a repayment plan, and we have just agreed on they're going to repay that amount in 5 installments over the next 5 years of $9,214.77. I've also requested, if they have any questions in the future going forward about eligible versus ineligible expenses, to reach out, and we'll provide some resolution on that. And I've also requested every 6 months that they provide an update on expenditures from the proceeds from the sand mining operation.
I might just clarify a little bit, as far as the legal expenses goes. These are not legal expenses for other things in the town. They were directly related to the park, and we're in an arbitration with the contractor. We feel like we were not paid as much as we should have been paid for the dirt that was mined there. And so the purpose of that legal fee is to recover perhaps as much as $200,000 in fees that we think we weren't going to get without going through the legal process. And that money will be used directly for, the construction of the park, just as the most of the other money was as well. So that's not just a slush fund for legal fees for us to pay, other activities that's specifically related to the park, specifically to gain more money from the mining operation to construct the park.
That's great. As it relates to the Greenbelt, though, this is a satisfactory arrangement through legal and everything, and it's resolved with regard to the repayment, and in a sense, that's put to bed. Is that
Yes,
correct?
sir.
Okay, Elizabeth?
Just for clarification on that. So the legal fees are not allowed, and that's part of what you're paying back.
Yes,
And y'all are clear about that
yes,
going forward.
yes.
And the legal fees do make up the bulk of what they're paying back.
Mr. Jones?
Simple question. I mean, does the staff have any issue with physically what has happened on the property of late?
No, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, that's good. Unless there are any other questions, I think that brings this topic to a close. Is that correct, Eric?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Mr. Wallace, thank you very much. Okay, so now at this point, we're going to move on to our 5-year review plan. There are 5 items here that I know came up in the last meeting. I watched that whole YouTube. And Eric and I have since talked about it in great detail. And I know the staff has come up with some recommendations relating to each of these topics. We do not have to agree on any of these things today necessarily. If we do, it's fine. We almost regardless will have to come back for another meeting to do a final approval of whatever the 5-year plan is to be prior to it going to council. All correct?
Yes, sir.
And that would be in February, the next 5-year review meeting would be in February, right?
I do have a schedule at the end. We can look over that. I don't know that we'll resolve it all by February, but we have the full calendar year to synthesize all these recommendations into one document that could then be approved by you all to send to county council.
Perfect. So basically, we have some time to work with, but if we can get through some of these, that'd be great. I also know we lose some people at 11:15. So anyway, with that, I'll kick it back to you, Eric.
Okay, we talked a little bit about land costs forecasting at our last meeting, and the context of that was to try and help determine would the potential increase in land costs over the next several years justify a recommendation to county council to potentially borrow some money to have that additional money available right now while land costs are lower. So I reached out to Stacy Miller, who is the county's real property manager, and she reached out to Josh Dix with the Charleston Trident Association of Realtors to try and develop some kind of forecast for us. What I've attached here on this slide from the National Association of Realtors, it's their commercial real estate metro market report for the third quarter of 2021. It just gives a general indicator of the strength of the Charleston commercial real estate market. You can see that it says right here that the region is stronger compared to the overall U.S. market. And in fact, for the third quarter of 2021, it was one of the top 11 markets with the highest indices in the nation. So in asking Stacy about some tools for estimating our land costs, she immediately suggested that CoStar Analytics would be a good tool to use for that. It's an industry leader, and it bases its projections on larger tracts of land. However, she's not aware, nor was Mr. Dix aware of any tools that directly project costs for just raw land. Nevertheless, Josh got creative for us. He created a custom report that actually takes all three types of commercial property, which are industrial, office, and retail, and based on trends over the past 5 years, which are shown, each quarter for the last 10 years, each quarter is plotted along the bottom here of the table with square footage pricing over on the left-hand side. He used all three of those types of commercial property, and these types do have some improvements on them. They're not just raw land, but he averaged those together to try and develop this raw land forecast, which is shown in green here at the bottom. So the solid line is the trend over the last 10 years, and the dashed line is the projection over the next 5 years. And that's really as far out as anyone felt comfortable going. And of course, there were all kinds of disclaimers and caveats that there's so many factors that are involved that this type of estimating is pretty difficult to do. But that bottom green line is then shown on this table. And this is kind of where the meat of this section is. The table shows the land cost projections in square feet and percentage of growth for each quarter for the next 5 years. Below each year on the table, we show the quarterly growth is compounded together to project the annual growth as a percentage. So for 2022, it'd be 4.92%, 2023, 2.79%, and so on. You'll notice that while costs are expected to increase over the next 5 years, it is slowing down. So 4.92% in 2022 and all the way down to 0.31% in 2026. And Stacy explained that the reason for this is they're looking at the current inflation. Inflation's driving these increases, but they do expect that inflation to subside between 2023, 2024, and then really drop by 2025. So that's what's driving these percentages. And when you compound each year, the total 5-year growth that's projected right now is 9.51% increase. And that's really all the data that we were able to synthesize and bring to you today, but hopefully it provides something for a way you can continue your discussion on it as you weigh a recommendation for any potential bonding of Greenbelt funds.
But it would also relate to a little bit to deal flow in that if we don't have the deal flow, there's no point in bonding, even if we think land is cheaper today than it will be in 3 years. Correct?
Yeah, you know, if you don't have the projects ready to go, and we bond the money out, then you're still going to be paying the higher land prices down the road, and then overall losing money to debt service.
That's like the most expensive way to do it. That would be the most expensive way to do it.
It appears unless there's projects piling up, they're going to completely expend the funds that are available now, which is about 17 million total. That would be a more expensive route to take at this time.
So it would be reasonable then to just postpone any bond discussion for 2 to 4 years until we have the deal flow to justify the conversation. That's also correct, right?
You know, we could always bring it back up at any time if we're getting short on available cash, and you know that's something that you all want to look at. It doesn't have to be done during the 5-year plan review, but my recommendation would be if we don't have the projects out there, then we're risking losing money by bonding money now.
Right. Mr. Jones?
I laugh. I've been in the business most of my life of predicting, and most of them, not only mine, but others have been wrong. And I look at this, there's so many variables. I'm not going to take issue with it. I mean, I believe inflation is going to be with us for a while. But one thing you haven't mentioned, or what hasn't been mentioned, is the fact that, interest rates almost certainly are going to go up, and we could debate by how much. And although I don't, if we go by this, there's not much of an argument, I agree with you, to go out and bond. But if you're going to raise money now, you're going to get it much cheaper. This is my opinion, that you'll get it cheaper now than what you will in 2 or 3 years' time, perhaps by a significant margin. So there is a merit still in raising money for bonding, in my opinion, but I'm not sure that, it's a strong argument. Do I make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Any other comments? Taylor?
I first of all, I appreciate the work the staff put in here, because I was one of the ones that brought it up. And you're right, if we don't have the projects, it doesn't seem like you would do it. But if the cost of borrowing is going to be less than the cost of the increase in the price of land, if you don't take a look at these projections, then you don't know, and you can't make a decision on that. Yeah. And as an advisory board, I think it's incumbent upon us. I think we owe it to the board or to the council to look at this and every year make a recommendation of whether we should bond or make a recommendation to bond or not. And there's more, I think, to the process, because I think you have to take a look at projections. But what are our incoming revenues? Does it make sense? Do we really need it? And that would be the project space that you're talking about there. And then you have to take a look at the interest rates and what those projections are. And then I think you also include, there are other issues, whether how much the council's already or the county's going to borrow anyway, and there may not be enough room for us to borrow. So it seems to me that there's a lot here that if we could make that into a process, it could be an easy presentation just like this, and we could easily spend 15 minutes on it each year.
Do you want to suggest or make a motion to touch on it the first meeting of every year or something like that?
It could be, but it would, and I don't want to spend a lot of time unless something stands out to say, hey, we really need to talk more about this. I think that what you're showing here shows that I think we're okay not to bond, because if you take a look at the revenues that we do have, we're okay. And we don't have a lot of projects right now. But if we do find ourselves in a position where the interest rates are low again and the price of land is going up a lot faster, then we may want to take a look at it. We don't have to bond for 40 years. It could just be a 10-year bond, or it could be a 5-year bond, whatever it makes sense. But we would need the input from the rest of the staff here at the county to say what other projects are we already bonding, and we may not have the room. And I think that was one of the things that was brought up at the last meeting. So thanks for entertaining this and looking at it.
That makes sense. Andrew?
Just a quick question. So if whatever circumstances did dictate that we look at it and we all decide, hey, this is a good idea to explore, what is the time in which we could act upon that? Like, you know, if we decide, hey, say right now, these numbers were different and we all decided, yes, let's do it. Like, how soon could we make it happen?
What I recall from last meeting when Mr. Giles spoke, he mentioned that this would almost surely have to go to a voter referendum. And there's a deadline, it's in the middle of August for council to actually vote to put that on the ballot for the following November. So if you decided today that it was something you wanted to do and made that recommendation to council, it would then go to council, assuming that they agreed with you, then it would take 3 readings, I believe, to get that, to pass that, to put the question on the ballot for this November.
For November. Yeah.
6 months was probably a
Right. Okay. So it's not
a
something
safe
that can
estimate.
happen fast. I guess I just wanted to like have that out there. So maybe first meeting of every year is when you would want to start looking at it, because after that it starts to get, if we do decide it's a good idea, it starts to get a smaller of a chance that we can actually get it done.
Good.
It has to go to the finance committee before it goes to full council, and so it is a process that has to happen.
Okay, well, based on comments so far, does anybody have a motion or an additional question or comment?
I move that we defer a decision.
We have a motion to defer the decision just to another meeting, or?
Once a year.
Once a year.
Okay.
Yeah, until next year.
The beginning of the year.
Okay, so to clarify, I believe the motion is the first meeting of every year, we will do a similar evaluation to make a decision as to whether or not to bond for that year,
Or recommend bonding.
or recommend bonding for that year.
I'll second that.
It's Mr. Jones, seconded by Taylor. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, great. So that motion carries.
I have
Elizabeth?
one clarifying thing for Eric on that, and just about the need for a referendum, because, and this may be a legal question, if the sales tax was approved, didn't it approve the ability to bond?
I don't believe so. I believe, and Mark, maybe you can shake your head yes or no if I'm right or wrong on this, but I believe that would be a separate ordinance from the sales tax ordinance to actually borrow money that would be paid from that sales tax.
Ms. Hagan, off the top of my head, I don't remember what exactly the original half-cent sales tax that was passed, allowed the county to do. I do know that the council has been in the habit of wanting to have referendums for additional bonding, which is separate from the initial. And so anything that you guys propose now, I believe would qualify as something that is an additional and separate from what had been acted on in previous years.
Going forward, maybe we can just get some clarity on that. Thank you.
Elizabeth, from what I remember in the last meeting, it was basically we were at our limit. The county was
Yeah.
at its limit, and to get additional past the limit is what would require a referendum.
Going over the limit is
Right,
the
if we were
issue. Yeah.
if we were under a borrowing.
That's a really good point,
Yeah.
because that would be a factor for us to decide in that timing. If
'Cause
that
it may not
changed
need
at
to
all,
go
the
to referendum,
capacity was different, right?
Absolutely.
That's right. To exceed the debt limit requires
Limit.
vote,
Thank
requires
you.
voter approval.
Right.
I believe that's what it was.
Okay. Are we in a good position to move to the next topic? Okay.
Yes.
All right, so the next topic is forward spending limits.
Not going to introduce this topic too much. I know it's something that you all have been concerned about and talking about over the last couple of years. But here's just a quick review of where we currently stand. The current balances are shown in this column, so that's what is available. Or you'll also see a few of our municipalities are a little bit negative. And then I've also included the lifetime balance, so what's to be collected over the lifetime of the current program. So this is kind of where the meat is on this table. What I attempted to do was project various cap scenarios. So I looked at the total funding for the life of the program in the first column here, and then took 2.5% of that, 5%, and 10% to show what those caps would be. So at a 5% cap, Charleston County would not be able to afford to spend more than $2,058,864. And then you can see the various scenarios for 2.5, 5, and 10%. Mr. Moulton did ask the question when we talked last week, what would be roughly 1 year of funding, and that would correlate with the 5% cap. Just a few notes. Under the 5% scenario, City of Charleston would only be able to apply for a little over $684,000 during this grant cycle. Another issue that could pop up in the future, if you went with a 5% cap, then it would take about 10 years for the urban unincorporated pot of money to be back within the cap. So you wouldn't be able to allocate any of that money for about 10 years.
Effectively freezing that allocation.
Yes, sir.
Period of time, right?
Under the current formula.
Yeah. Any questions here? Mr. Jones?
This is a matter of interest. You said we've got 8 applications in the pipeline. Are they urban, or are they going to exacerbate this situation? Or are we going to get back to normal with more rural applications, from what you see from the 8 that you have before you?
I believe 2 of those are urban and 6 are rural, but we haven't actually received the applications yet, just the letters of intent, so we don't have very many details yet on exactly what they're asking for.
It's not going to exacerbate the situation at the moment, the urban situation.
I know City of Charleston is asking for some money. We typically don't get into details on these, from what I understand, until we actually have the application in hand.
Any
So-
other thoughts or comments here? Yeah, Taylor.
I'm going to ask the question of so right now, this is a proposed topic that we want to take up in the 5-year plan. That's what we're saying right now.
Yep.
And I think I'd like to also add that we look at, because what ends up happening is money, at least in the past, money has come from the rural. I think I'd like to add a floor to how much maybe it's a remaining balance in the rural, that we don't go below, maybe a floor to that balance.
Well, if I could here, that's the reason I was asking for the 1 year number.
Yeah.
And for it to come in at 5%, that would effectively limit where the rural money got dispersed in that annual period. And I felt like that properly contained it, if we could adopt the 5%, because I don't know, it kind of puts a governor on the whole thing. It kind of fixes the urban unincorporated, well, doesn't fix it, but it kind of freezes that. It leaves rural well protected in that every single municipality would not go out past a year. And I don't know, it seems like that was kind of an elegant solution to the whole thing. But
Okay.
That's sort of my opinion, having kind of gone through it with Eric.
Maybe that does it. I'll look more at it. I hadn't had a chance
Yeah.
to take a hard look at it, and I'll do that.
But, Mr. Jones?
I think this is a hard one. I don't know what the solution is, but if we go by the forecast made of land prices, I mean, it really doesn't make any difference, does it? If somebody exceeds their allocation, because of this forecast, land prices aren't going to go up much anyhow. Just an observation.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other thoughts, comments on this topic, or even motions?
So as we're
Elizabeth?
pondering this, one of the things that, to me, I'm thinking about looking at our history of applications and projects that come in, and what could be outliers that we don't have unintended consequences by, making some forecasts or assumptions that we regret later. And, it's clear a project like Boone Hall, which is what most of that urban unincorporated used that up. We knew that, and that was such a unique, important, I want to call it an iconic project for what Greenbelt is, that was justifiable. So we may want to, as we go forward, think about, this is what we do, the standard would be this, but it would require an exceptional vote if we wanted to do something different, to allow that extraordinary project.
Right,
That's important for us to have flexibility like that.
yes.
But I don't want it to ever be the rule that allows forward spending that's reckless.
So like a supermajority vote, is that what you mean?
I think we need to think about that. I don't
Okay,
think we should
okay.
do that today, but I
Okay.
think all of us should think about what is the right way to do that. And maybe staff could look at kind of some ways that minimize unintended consequences, but also give us that flexibility on the extraordinary project.
Yeah, I think you're gonna run into issues with some of these smaller things, like Somerville, this would limit Somerville to $17,000 a year.
It's such a small,
They're not gonna have any projects for 17,000, they're gonna have a project for 200,000.
Just to be clear, it would limit them from going any further forward spending their allocation by 17. That 17,045 would be as far as they could go forward spend.
Right.
Yeah.
but you're raising the point that we had in the beginning about allocating anyway, because it divvies up to it really hurts the smaller
Yeah,
municipalities
cuts
the
them into
most,
little
because they
pieces.
almost can't afford projects.
Did you have your hand up? Okay, sorry. Okay, well,
A question,
Yeah,
just
yeah.
clarification. So Beezer, are you proposing that 5% is what a potential solution could be to a forward spending cap?
I liked it because nobody got a year ahead of them, more than a year ahead of themselves.
Right.
And it protected the rural money from getting too spent.
Okay. So effectively, looking at this, just taking the top line, City of Charleston, since their balance is, say, 1.3, their 5% is 2, they would not be able to spend more than 700 right now, today.
Right, but they quickly be back in next year with 7 plus 2.
Right. Yeah, no, I'm not upset
Yeah,
about that.
that's how it
I'm just trying
That's how
to
it
make
works.
sure that that's, so, people have built up certain funds to, North Charleston. So for them, not a huge deal. It would be more of an impact to those who, A, have less of an allocation, so they're getting less every year to build up a fund for a specific project, or B, those who have spent, maybe already forward spent or spent more. I'm just trying to get a clarification on that. Okay.
And it's not just rural that has a big unspent amount. I mean, the city of North Charleston and Mount P have.
Yeah, Mount Pleasant, sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And then, like you said, it would freeze unincorporated jobs. Thereby, I think, what you're saying, Elizabeth, it makes sense to have well, hey, if there is an opportunity, we know that there's 2.8 sitting there eventually, if something comes along, it would be worth at least
Something
that.
extraordinary came along, yeah.
To
It would
score
be worth
high,
looking
right.
at it, having an escape or a back door or something like that.
Mr. Jones?
Elizabeth, what you said, actually, I could carry that a little further, which may be academic. You say we should look at a project, and if it has merit, then we should okay the spending. Okay, what about, let's say, if the city of Charleston has an opportunity to do an immense deal, well beyond their allocation? Do we look at it and say, this is so good, we're going to appropriate funds from the urban side regardless?
I think that's a really good question and should be part of it. I think what I really liked, what the city of Charleston did the first time in an extraordinary circumstance, and I think that was Fort Pemberton. They actually got the borrowing the bridge funding from the conservation fund, from another organization that actually does lending for that. And in a situation like that, I would encourage an applicant to actually find another source of lending that wouldn't necessarily cause us to readjust all this. There are ways to do that, and I think those ought to be looked at first, that we would be the lender of last resort in that sense, just using that term amongst our allocated pots of money. So it's a good point.
Yeah, very good point. Any other thoughts or questions or motions or things that you would like staff to bring back for the next conversation?
What are we deciding on this one? We're just going to ponder this, are we?
Yep. Well, currently what I'm saying is there a motion? Are there more questions? Or is there anything you would like staff to bring back for the next meeting
Relating to this?
relating to this topic?
Okay.
So Beezer, my thought on this is that this is we've been spending so much time on this. This is new information and we have more questions. This is one I think we ought to defer, and we don't need a motion on right now. Get this other information we've talked about and understand the bonding situation, and then be prepared to make a decision, a recommendation. But I
sounds
think
good.
we can,
Yeah.
I
Is
know
there-
I need some more time to think about it.
Okay, that's fine. Is there anything anybody would like from staff pertaining to this? data basically of any kind.
Would it be too much to have the past 5 years of rural spending, so we know what the normal amount is spent on
We have
rural?
that right now. Or, well, I shouldn't put you on the spot like that. Sorry.
No, next time is
Do it
fine.
next time.
Yeah, that's fine.
For sure.
Yeah, let's don't worry about it.
All committed to memory yet, like Kathy did, but,
Yeah.
but I can certainly dig that up. Yes, sir.
No, that's good. So next meeting, we will have that. Is there anything else you guys want for next meeting? Maybe
Just
this topic.
Can I get some clarification as well? So these are all things in the 5-year review. So is that, how long is that review going to be, or is
Whole
this
year.
it?
We have this whole year to work it out. Anything we decide, like we just decided on the land cost forecast, even that's got to come back one more time to the full board. We have to vote on it as a whole thing, and it could potentially get rehashed a little bit if need be.
Okay,
So, anything we do today in the form of a motion or acceptance of one of these individual things will have to be either quickly reassessed or completely reassessed one more time.
okay,
By
thank
the
you.
year end, by year.
At year's end, just like we did 5 years ago, there will be a supplemental report that will incorporate everything we've discussed over the year and any votes that you've taken. And I'll bring that back to you for one final review before you recommend that package to county council.
Thank you, yes.
One other question related to this is the unincorporated. In the past, the staff has talked about, the problems with the unincorporated. Should we look at, should we look at increasing the funding or putting it somewhere else? Is the unincorporated, is that going to be the target of opportunity for purchasing land in the more maybe unrural area? And I don't know that. I don't know what the map looks like, but it seems like we spin that pretty quickly. And I don't know the answer to it, but, and if anybody does, I'm more than happy to take that on right now.
Well, I
That's
do
the
know
truth.
shifting the allocation creates a whole new, much bigger issue that then individually has to go to council and opens up a lot of debate.
Okay.
But, that's almost like once you shift the allocations, it becomes sort of a monster.
Mm-hmm.
But if we need to do it, we need to do it. But it seems like a lot to me. I don't personally think that's necessary, but I welcome any other comments. Mr. Jones?
I would just agree with you.
Okay.
I can't
Yeah.
see North Charleston or Mount Pleasant giving up their
No.
allocation.
Yeah.
But I do think it raises an important point, Taylor, and if we look at, because the history of our projects that kind of fell into that, this is one of the challenges because we did do allocation. These rural unincorporated, this is just what is not incorporated, but really is classified as rural, based on the urban growth boundary.
Yeah, that's right, within the urban growth boundary, but not part of a municipality.
Exactly. So that's a line. The urban growth boundary has been one that is very important for us to, to honor and pay attention to. It's one of the reasons that this whole, Greenbelt funding has come up. I think you always need to look at a project and really understand that and make sure that the line is there. We made an exception with the Angel Oak because of the arbitrariness of the urban growth boundary line there, and could use the net effect was to improve the rural conservation outcome of that edge of Johns Island around an iconic place, the Angel Oak. And so we were able to look at that in that unique circumstance and say, hey, this is where the funds need to come from. We think that's fair. It's not taking it from anybody else, and make those decisions. Again, an extraordinary and unusual situation, but we know that we do get those every now and then. So again, you got to watch out for unintended consequences. So I think that's a good
Have a
point.
provision for
Have a
that.
provision for that.
Sounds right.
And maybe that's the way to do it, is just have some
Give
kind
us
of provision we can
flexibility.
talk through, and
Yeah.
whether it's a supermajority vote or something like that, whatever we think the right thing is. Okay.
Okay, so last time I'll ask, any action today, any other things that you want from staff? No? Okay, we're gonna move to the next topic, and, if you decide between now and next meeting that you would like to see as additional, points on this, obviously let us know. Okay, so the next one is structures and impervious surfaces. Eric?
Okay, so what are we talking about with impervious surfaces? We're talking most commonly about roads, rooftops, sidewalks, and parking lots. Impervious surfaces do prevent or impede water from infiltrating into the soil on site and result in increased runoff into watersheds, which can potentially negatively impact the quality of water and reduce flood mitigation value of the land. In my short time here, there's been several questions raised from staff, from board members, as well as Greenbelt recipients regarding whether certain sizes and types of structures can be allowed. And in my opinion, there's a good bit of gray area regarding the structures, and it can vary from each grant agreement. And really, structures, of course, have rooftops, so they're one very common type of impervious surface. And conservation easements these days typically utilize impervious surface limits to help handle not only structures, but all the impervious surface limits or impervious surfaces on a property. CEs generally aim for an impervious surface cap of no more than 1%. Of the total acreage. However, it's sometimes unfeasible for the smaller parcels because a 1 acre, 1% of 1 acre is much smaller piece of land than a 100-acre parcel, than 1% of a 100-acre parcel. So typically conservation easements will impose larger percentages on smaller parcels and smaller percentages on larger parcels. Currently, you have the ability to impose impervious surface limits as a special condition, or at least make that recommendation to county council. But from what I've seen, this has been pretty rare in the history of the program. Therefore, recommendations, at least initial recommendations from staff, are to implement standard impervious surface caps based on a percentage of the total area. This will help take away some of those gray areas and will also help to further Greenbelt plan goals related to flood mitigation and water quality. It'll also allow the applicant greater flexibility in developing a park. There's often a lot of time between the time they apply and master plans can change, so it does provide some flexibility without having to come back to the board for every small change. The applicant could still request adjustments to the cap. So these would just be a standard cap if they felt like they needed more impervious surfaces or felt like they wanted to protect the property greater and wanted less, then they could request that, as could your recommendation be to county council. And we're talking about just for fee simple non-corridor projects. And the reason for that is conservation easements are the main document that governs Greenbelt projects for conservation easements. So they already incorporate these impervious surface limits. And we don't want to include the corridor projects because most of those are connections to Greenbelt projects. And we know those are going to go well over 1% or even 50% of impervious surface on the total right-of-way or property. So my next slide, from my experience in park development, I just wanted to kind of look at what's the minimum impervious surface that it would take to provide public access and comfortable public access to a park, because that is part of the Greenbelt program, is to actually make these sites available for folks to reap the benefits of green space. So I came up with some rough figures there for an ADA parking space, a small restroom building, a picnic shelter, and then miscellaneous hardscape. To be about 2,500 square feet would be about what you would need just to provide basic creature comforts and public access. And the reason I came up with that is because I wanted to then look at this table, which shows parcel sizes over on this left-hand column. So the first row where it says 1, there's 23 fee simple projects in the Greenbelt program right now that are 1 acre or less. If you move down to 2.5 acres, there's 16 fee simple projects that fall between that 2.5 and 1 acre threshold, and so on and so forth. But if you look at a 1 acre parcel and you want to provide a minimum of 2,500 square feet, then a good round number to cap that impervious surface at would be about 6%. So kind of wanted to start there. And then for me, it's easier to kind of visualize these caps in acres rather than square feet. So I went ahead and converted the table to acres now.
I like it.
And then as we drop down to the next slide, you can barely see, I think, some bold around these different sections. As we talked about, larger parcels would need a smaller percentage for their limit, where smaller parcels would need a higher limit. So you got to start drawing it back at some point. So there's some kind of arc that goes through here from 6% on these smaller parcels and reduces down to 3% for these, and then down to 1.5% for the very large parcels here. And again, as a reminder, these are just standard percentages, but can be adjusted up and down, but it does make sure that every project going forward has some type of impervious surface limit on it. And again, I don't feel like the standard should be 1% or lower like conservation easements, because we are providing public access to these fee simple properties, or the Greenbelt recipient is. It's a little different from conservation easements where there's no public access. It's private property that's being protected. So just wanted to point those out and kind of show a recommendation of how we might tier these impervious cap scenarios, and happy to answer questions and open it up for discussion.
So to be perfectly clear, the bold line represents staff recommendation. Okay.
Yes, sir.
I support what you're doing in principle, and I sort of think back to the Planning Commission. We have a situation where we impose limits, but you have special exceptions. You may go to the BZA or BZA and get a special exception. Why couldn't we have something here? We don't write it in stone, but it's written in pretty dark ink. But if you feel that there's justification for increasing it, why don't we provide an opportunity for that applicant to come before us or whoever to argue for an increased amount?
That's exactly what we would do. It would be part of the grant application where when they put their acreage in, it would say, you know, this property would be limited to 6% impervious surface. If you feel you need more than that or less than that, then make your argument here, and then that would be up for you all to determine.
Good thought. Any other thoughts, questions? Yes, Andrew.
So first question to you, just curious how you arrived at these numbers. And then the second thing is that I would argue, like, similar to what you were saying, Mr. Jones, but if it's a park situation, if it's a fee simple project, similar to a corridor project, I don't think that if you're doing, say, a 10-foot or 12-foot wide asphalt trail within some that's impervious, I would say personally that wouldn't go towards your cap. I think that would be an exempt impervious limit, in my opinion. And then maybe get a little bit more stringent with some of these numbers, because I think personally, when you get up to some of these higher, I mean, if you have 500 acres, do you need 7.5 acres of impervious? Probably not. That's my personal opinion.
Can you clarify why the bike path is the bike path different from a road in terms of impervious?
No, but it would be, so if you have a 20-acre park and you're doing a bike path or a multi-use trail throughout that, I mean, that is a key part of that, the infrastructure for that park, a key part of having it. I'm thinking of one of the newer Charleston County parks down at the end off the Greenway. I forget what it's called. It's
Stono?
Yeah, the Stono River Park. So it is largely a path, and it kind of goes over on a couple islands and everything like that. And so that could potentially, I don't know if it would hit any of these marks or anything, but to me that would be something that is the way for people to get, similar to what you said with with the corridors. It's a way for people to get into the nature that we're conserving. So why would we penalize people for that?
That's an asphalt path you're describing.
Yes.
Okay.
Because that provides for full accessibility.
Yeah.
Because then you might get some situations where like, oh, well, we were going to go over our cap, so we're not going to do it in asphalt, and therefore now you can't, maybe certain types of people can't visit the park or things like that. I'd rather see them work on the parking or say, hey, well, we were gonna get to our cap, but now we have to do a green roof on our park building or something like that, force them to use other ways to get underneath it.
Yeah, I like Andrew, kind of how you're thinking about it, but I think that we would not want to make exceptions like that. The whole point is to have a standard and to try and get it right, and then allow them to make a case if they needed to adjust it. Because so much of this is case by case, and as you're describing right there, each property is so different. So what we have seen over the last few years, the challenge is not having anything down. And we're just kind of a blank slate every single time. What I like about a sliding scale is it gives us a standard, and we actually are saying what you're saying, which is impervious surfaces matter, we're capping them, and that we want you to consider alternatives that are better for the environment if it can work for you. And so that the limit is there. And a lot of times it takes that type of incentive for the applicant to think, oh, I really don't need asphalt here. This parking lot is actually a lot better sand, and that's better for the absorption of the land, and then they look at it that way. So that's exactly the intent of having a standard. If you give exemptions, people are always working on the exemption rather than understanding the standard. And I would like to we're looking for more consistency here. I think on this one in particular, as we go forward, we're going to need to reevaluate after a few years. Hey, did we get it right? Are we in the ballpark? Or are so many people asking for exemptions that we might need to adjust the actually exactly where that is? I think this is a good start, Eric, and I really appreciate you putting it in there. I think we got to, throw the dart at the board and see how we're doing and be able to adjust it without, a lot of excessive administration and bureaucracy involved.
Jason.
Happy New Year, everyone. This one, I don't know if we're trying to fix something that doesn't exist right now. And I'm wondering if this is really the job of the Greenbelt Advisory Board to really start looking at site plan review, but that's what I'm seeing it as. And I go back to the Fort Pemberton application. Before we do anything at Fort Pemberton, we have to bring a plan back to the Greenbelt Advisory Board. And I just don't know if that's what the Greenbelt Advisory Board is supposed to be doing. So I put that out there just for maybe some discussion, and maybe I'm incorrect, I don't know. But this targets very specific park type developments, which is only going to happen typically in a municipality, right? And with stormwater regulations being increased annually, the city of Charleston has a pretty robust stormwater manual for any site development that ever happens on any property. And I just wonder if we're creating another level of bureaucracy that we really shouldn't be delving into.
Can you comment on that?
From a staff perspective, we do get, quite a bit of questions about, is this type of structure allowed? Is that type of structure allowed? Can we do this or that? I think this would it would actually provide, in my opinion, some of the grant recipients greater flexibility to say, you've got 4 acres of impervious surfaces, use those how you want to. Because if that's the concern, that's the reason that we're concerned about structures and roads, is because of the potential negative impacts of impervious surfaces. Then it doesn't really matter if it's a building or a paved trail or a road, it's an impervious surface. So it gives the applicant more flexibility to design how they want to, and keeps us from spending a lot of time on, well, is this something that needs to go to the GAB to have their grant agreement changed so that they can have a restroom building because it didn't mention a restroom building on the original master plan, that type of thing. It would clear up some gray areas and streamline things on our end at least.
And if they needed more at that point, they could just write it into the application.
That's how I propose it, is once we set a limit, if they need to go over that, then the onus is on the applicant to prove why they need that and to get your approval and county council's approval on that. If it happens 5 years down the road and there's already a grant agreement, then it would be the same process of coming back and having that grant agreement amended to increase that impervious surface cap.
Mr. Jones.
I would agree with staff. I think that it's incumbent upon the Greenbelt Advisory Board to have a view of impervious surfaces. To not have a view, I think, would be wrong. So I still go along with staff, and I think if we have a mechanism for the applicant to address the possibility of having more impervious surface, I don't think that that's an intolerable task, in my view.
Taylor.
Agree. I think being on the subcommittee that looks at all these pretty hard, this would give me, this is something that would trigger, hey, we need to have a conversation on this piece. And so I like these guidelines. So I would support them.
One more question. What about existing surfaces? You know, this could effectively limit what any improvement somebody could do if we're talking about a property that already is over the cap for whatever
Once
reason.
again, that could be dealt with in the application, but do you want to comment on that?
I think it's something that needs to be addressed. It's not something that I thought about prior to the meeting, but, you know, do you want to add existing impervious surfaces into that cap, or is it only for new impervious surfaces? Haven't thought about that much yet, and we could certainly look and see how it's done in the conservation easement world.
It might be helpful to go look and kind of, if you applied this, test it on our existing projects and just kind of get a sense of how close or off we are, then we could really look at it a little more clearly. I would just like to amplify what Eric said in terms of this being actually a liberating standard for applicants as well as for our staff. I mean, we've worked so hard to try and be, you know, flexible, but have a very clear standard that we, and communicating that standard clearly is probably the most important thing we need to do for our applicants so they know. And this allows us to do that. I think we get a lot of the questions because we haven't been doing that. And I also really think that that we have our staff monitors every project we have every year. We've got accountability to the grant agreement. It's our legal obligation. We've got accountability to every project that's approved, so that coming back with the master plan is part of that accountability, if that's kind of what the grant agreement agreed to, and that was part of the application. So hopefully we do it in a way that's streamlined enough so it isn't too bureaucratic and too onerous. No one likes excessive busy work like that, but I think if it achieves accountability goals, and that's kind of what we're looking at this 5-year review, is are we doing it well? Are we improving accountability? Are we improving our standards? Are we making the Greenbelt program better? I would say this one would do that.
Jason?
Do we know if there are any other Greenbelt programs in the country that have this that we could compare to?
I've actually been trying to research some other programs that are similar to ours and reached out to the Trust for Public Land with some contacts there. Surprisingly, there's very few programs that are similar to ours where it's a government-run grant program. You know, a lot of the other programs hand it off. You know, they contract with a nonprofit to run the program, to manage the money, or they just purchase the land themselves for conservation. But I'll certainly try and dig up some more that might be similar to us.
Plank would know right off the bat.
Yeah,
You should just
good
send
point.
it to him.
Yeah.
Like, you might have to simplify it a little bit and just say, does this scale look like it would work on a variety of different properties, and just see what he has to say about it. I bet he'd like to chime in, actually. Yeah.
Jason, did you follow the PR? It says we're the best in Greenbelts.
That's right. So at this point, anything, number one, is there a motion? Or number two, is there anything you'd like from staff for next meeting?
Well, the motion, I think, well, generally we're in favor, but I don't know whether we want to write it in stone at this point, do we?
It's fine.
I think Jason has some, I mean, if you want to get the input back from Chuck to answer Jason's question.
That's important.
Okay, can we pose it to Chuck?
Yes,
Link?
absolutely.
And just see
And
what
run
he has
these-
to say about it.
And run these numbers on existing projects so we can get a sense that it's the right sliding scale.
Sure.
That's great. Okay, so we'll come back to that next meeting. let's see if we can just touch on these next two topics before we lose folks. Improvement changes after project approval.
Okay, so just briefly here, our ordinance speaks to how improvement or use changes should be handled after a grant agreement is in place. The first paragraph here is really related to very egregious changes, which would basically require the project to be taken out of the Greenbelt program. It's basically saying that it no longer is a Greenbelt property, so then that money would have to be paid back to the Greenbelt program, or a land swap would occur where that land, is no longer meets the Greenbelt plan and purposes, so you're going to buy another parcel somewhere else. So that's not really what we're talking about right here. The second paragraph, second section, is on less egregious changes after a project has been approved, and focuses on uses that are adverse to the original purposes. And this section puts the onus on the grant agreement and the grant application to then determine what those original purposes were. So just showing you our online application here, a few sections that actually get at this information. And we asked for them to describe in detail the proposed uses for the property, how the land characteristics meet the Greenbelt definitions, address public use, provide a schedule of days and hours when it will be open to the public, describe if portions of the property will be rented or leased for events such as weddings, family reunions, fundraisers, sporting events, etc. And then lastly, we ask about improvements planned for the property, and we specifically ask about what we call our minor improvements. So pervious parking, roads, trails, boardwalks, and footbridges. If you say you are going to have some of those, it already asks for square footage and length of these types of improvements. Down at the bottom, if you say you're going to have other improvements, then you just kind of list those, and there's not a whole lot of detail that we ask for there. And I think that may be a part of the issue here. So once we've gotten the project's been approved, we look at the application as well as any conditions that may be recommended and added by county council to develop a grant agreement. Article 6 of the grant agreement really speaks to what can and can't be done. This is just a sample grant agreement, Article 6. It talks about what type of use, passive use for this one. And then in item 3, it gets more specific and limits this one to trails, greenways, interpretive parks, wildlife observation, biking, walking, and jogging. So this is a pretty passive park that this grant agreement's talking about here. So my recommendation would be, I don't think this is a major issue, but I think we can do some things on the front end, on the application, to help applicants think and vision a little bit more about what they might want to do on that property, especially knowing that they may be buying it and then fundraising for the next 5 to 10 years before it's actually built and open to the public. So we could provide a more comprehensive checklist for any use or improvement that they might consider in the future, instead of just saying what other improvements or uses are you going to have. Think about all these different types of activities and uses. And then also note in the application that if there's substantial changes to those uses and improvements down the road, that'll require an amendment to the grant agreement, which means coming back to the board and slows down the process. So that's my recommendation for that. Would love to hear any feedback you might have.
I don't see, Will. I got all of this and I looked at it. What is underlined is your recommendation for an inclusion in the ordinance.
What's underlined is just from the ordinance and the grant agreement, or just, I think those are actually underlined in the grant agreement. They're blanks when you fill it in. So that's just how the copy and paste worked out. But my recommendations are on this slide right here, which is just to amend the application to get applicants thinking about any future improvement that they might want to have out there, so that it could then be incorporated into the grant agreement.
Speaking from my narrow perspective, I can't see this, so
Yeah, I like what you're doing because listening to Kathy over the years and the issues that we've had have been the gray area. It's unclear, and I actually think we've been working very hard to improve the application for the applicants, so it helps them think about the right things that are going to improve the quality of their application. I personally think this is an important part of that because you're actually dealing with concrete specifics of what they're planning to do, and so much of our legal disputes, you're going to increase legal costs when you have gray area that's not spelled out. And I'm not talking about getting too detailed in the weeds, but these are important elements that keep their project in line with the Greenbelt standards. So I don't think we're overburdening them. I think this is a clarifying point, and I like where you're going with this. I also wanted to ask about the matter that's not addressed in here of timeline of implementation and issues we have with parks not getting open, what their anticipated timeline versus the reality of what we're dealing with. And is this where that should show up too, or is that a different area?
I hate to put it back on the board, but I think that's maybe a separate 5-year
Okay.
review topic that we could cover.
Was that the next topic?
I don't think so. Non-compliance and enforcement?
Okay.
No, if I understand correctly, it's, we have projects that were planned for public, we awarded funding for public parks to purchase the land for public parks. They say the park's going to be open in 5 years. Well, it's 10 years now and the park's still not open.
That's what.
So
and
you all
maybe
have
we
the
need a
ability.
separate
So that's not
topic
really
for that.
non-compliance, it's just correct.
You all have the ability to put in a special condition that says if this park isn't built or if the construction funding is not there within 5 years or 10 years or whatever, it could revert, to another, the property could transfer to another entity. Or we could look at it, some other type of standard.
I'd like to put that in there. We've talked about this a lot. It's been a difficult issue for us to deal with on an application without a standard in there or a expectation. And so, again, each project is different, but I do think we have seen problems come up, and maybe that's a good starting point for information for us looking at it is, what is the occurrence of that you see, even if it's just an interpretive thing, that is gives us a red flag on that project. So, assessing how much of a problem it really is for us, and do we need to address it separately, and what might be the options that are fair.
I think part of it kind of flows with the applicant's ability to manage the project. We do score that. That's part of the scoring process and
Okay, well,
application.
Let's try to be clear on this. So do you think we should add, or are you suggesting we add another topic?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Keep it isolated.
Yep, let's do it. So for next meeting, we'll have an agenda item that is titled, what exactly should we call this?
Project timeline, or, what's helpful for you?
Performance timeline, or, I don't know.
I'll work on that and
Yeah.
get with you prior to the next meeting
Okay.
as we finalize the agenda.
So that's a separate item. So going back to this, does anybody have any other comments, a motion, or things they would like to see before next meeting relating to this topic, improvement changes after project approval?
I think it should be deferred to the next meeting so we can look at it and then perhaps vote on it.
Any other thoughts, comments, questions, requests? Okay, then we're gonna move on to the next topic, which is non-compliance enforcement.
This one will be pretty brief. Authority to enforce is granted in all of our grant agreements, Article 4, Paragraph 7, as well as Article 5, Paragraph 4, which says we'll monitor the properties each year to ensure the funds have been spent and land is being used in accordance with the goals, objectives, and intent of the Greenbelt program. We do have a non-compliance procedure that was adopted on May 14th, 2013. This runs you through the process where discovery, that can be during the annual discovery of a violation, that could be part of the annual monitoring visit, other interested parties, neighbors, caretakers, managers, or other entities may notice it, like our county code enforcement, that there could be a violation. Once it's discovered, then we document that. We do it in a clear, detailed written description with measurements and photos with locations that are easily understandable to third parties, and also documented in a way that can be used for legal action if necessary. Next, we determine the severity and stage, whether it's a minor violation, which is an action prohibited by the grant agreement, but will not cause substantial harm to the property, like litter, dumping, limbs and debris affecting public use of land, or a major violation, which is an action clearly prohibited by the grant agreement and will cause substantial harm to the property. Examples of this are unauthorized construction, pollution, unauthorized timbering, and clearly unauthorized uses. The stage, in determining the stage of the violation, you look at whether it's just a threat, ongoing, if it's after the fact and irreversible, or if it requires immediate action or remedy. And we also try and determine who committed the violation. Is it the owner or a third party? If it's a third party, did the owner do anything that allowed that third party to think that it was allowable on that property? After the severity and stage are determined, we notify the eligible Greenbelt Fund recipient of the findings. We discuss the overall issue and the restrictions that are allowed or prevented in the grant agreement. And we request corrective action be taken and set a reasonable time frame to implement the prescribed remedy. Then we follow up. We do this to document the corrective efforts. If corrected, we notify the eligible Greenbelt recipient in writing. If not, we contact the administration and legal for additional guidance on pursuing further enforcement action. So that's our current procedure and what we follow. And one thing we're looking at is potential taking some ideas from the code enforcement world as an intermediate approach. So as it is right now, we kind of have asking nicely to comply with the Greenbelt grant agreement on one end, and then on the far other end of the spectrum, we have legal action, which county council has to direct us to initiate. So we're looking for a kind of a middle road enforcement tool, and I think that we could potentially get assistance from existing county code enforcement officers. We could potentially commission Greenbelt staff as code enforcement officers, and that way there could be citations or fines issued after, incorporated into our procedure process. All of this would have to be incorporated into the ordinance, so the ordinance would need to be amended to reflect this so that code could actually be enforced. And we'll continue to discuss this with legal as well as code enforcement and report back on any final recommendation we might have for you on this item.
Any thoughts, comments, questions?
So to be a code enforcement officer, do you have to have particular training? Or can you just say, hey, you're staff Greenbelt, you're a code enforcement officer?
County council votes to commission code enforcement officers. There's no test or exam or anything like that required.
Okay.
Elizabeth?
Yeah, just a clarifying question, Eric. So we need to go through the county code enforcement program as opposed to just instating fines?
For us to be able to issue those fines or citations,
required.
then it'd have to be done by a commissioned code enforcement officer. That could be existing officers over on the planning side of the county, or we as staff could be commissioned as code enforcement officers to be able to issue those citations.
How much more onerous would that be for you on staff to add that job to your job description?
I probably want to talk with Peggy about it a little bit more, but we are monitoring these sites already, and if there are violations, there is this procedure that we follow. So we're already communicating with the property owner and telling them what the prescribed remedy would be. This would just give it a little teeth instead of just asking nicely to please fix the situation that's
I
out
think
of
in some ways
compliance.
it would cut out the middleman, that they would be able to have direct authority to be able, because they're already out there, to issue a ticket.
But right now, I think that when I was reading it, you can't do that right on the site at the time. You got to go back, document, and then.
We'd update our whole process to bring to you and tell you how it would be done, but surely we wouldn't write a citation the first time we discover it. We give the owner an opportunity to rectify it without a citation.
What do the existing county code enforcement officers think about this? Have you gotten feedback from them?
I've only spoken with the planning director, and he's the one that kind of walked me through the process, and he felt like it was a good idea. And he actually was the one, I asked, can your code enforcement officers help us with issuing citations if this were incorporated into county code? And he felt like for us to actually be commissioned might be the easiest way to go, since we're the ones that are familiar with the terms of the grant agreement and the properties that we're monitoring.
Thoughts, comments, motions?
Well, we're going to keep working on this and bring you back a recommendation.
Okay. Well, then I think that's it for our list of agenda items. Yes, Andrew?
Pardon my ignorance, just because I'm new here, but is there a opportunity for previous applicants or municipalities to give us feedback during this 5-year review? And if not, I would suggest that maybe that's a part of what we're doing here, just to hear from an outside perspective of if somebody other than us thinks we should be doing something differently.
That's interesting. That's probably a good idea.
The town of Mount Pleasant would be very interested in providing feedback on corridor projects. It was a very difficult application to put together.
So we could do an online survey or something like that with open-ended, text
It goes
boxes.
to all our project partners.
Yeah, we could limit it to
Yeah.
project partners, or we could, either target it to those partners or make it open to the general public.
I think targeted makes sense because we want people who are informed. We're trying to
Okay.
get feedback on our actual program, like Christiane's saying, and get that feedback. I think we
Actual
talked about that
applicants.
early.
Yeah.
Earlier about having that in here, so
Okay.
a few years ago, so.
But real quick, is it all applicants or is it applicants who have succeeded in securing funds?
I would say all, because I would say those who have not succeeded may have a suggestion that could be different from those who have succeeded. And while we may not entertain all suggestions, I think that would make it biased, right? If we give it to just people who has gone through it successfully and happily, then we may just hear things of, well, yeah, that this was a great process. Thanks. I don't know, just throwing it out there.
Okay, well, I guess we can sort that out, but okay, so at this point, we'll just make that an additional item similar to the performance line item, right, for next meeting?
I'll bring you back at maybe a sample survey that we could send,
Great.
and we can limit that or talk more about that next meeting on who exactly gets to complete that survey.
Yeah, that's fine.
And
The
if,
sooner the better on that, because it may inform a lot about how we actually address some of these issues.
Okay, so you're saying you actually want it inside of our review process, well inside of our review process in order to inform us?
Yes.
I think that would make sense, right? We're doing a
Yes.
5-year review.
Otherwise, that's not gonna
Let's-
help.
So perhaps we actually try to execute on it next meeting?
Yeah, I think we should.
I'll bring a sample survey
Okay.
and for your review, and you can tell me if any changes should be made to it.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, one more just quick announcement. Some of you subcommittee members are just up against the deadline to basically re-up now, so you're interested in continuing on, or if you prefer to roll off, you can roll off. Also, it's a chance if anybody else wants to be on the subcommittee, you can let me know that too. I'll be reaching out to the subcommittee, those on the subcommittee who are at that deadline, to just check in with you to see if you want to continue on. That's just an announcement, basically.
I have a question.
Yes, Mr. Jones.
Sorry, just a question. I know you want to wrap up, but I'd be interested if anybody else has an opinion on this. Eligible Greenbelt recipient, it crops up a lot. And I'm not on the subcommittee, but I did watch a television of one application, and the eligible Greenbelt recipient was not impressive at all. Do we have really sufficient, examination of some of these people as to whether they really qualify? Because I think of the one example, it seemed that this Greenbelt applicant would just been put together just for the purpose of making an application.
Can you address that, Eric? I mean, you probably can't. You weren't, well, anyway, you want to try?
All I can speak to for that is we do have a section in the application that addresses the applicant's ability to actually manage the project. It asks about experience in project management, and they're awarded points based on those questions.
Okay.
Right now, my understanding, you see, this is how you've seen it, Eric, so far, is with Kathy. So much of that is vetting by you all based on that question, what the application states, but really trying to understand that, because many times you might have an answer that needs further explanation. It's not just what they write on the application.
Again, haven't gotten any applications in yet for this cycle, but I would assume that if something came in and it raised some red flags, we would certainly reach out and ask for more information and just make sure that they understand the program and what's required and ability to comply with those terms over the years.
Okay. Anything else you want to talk about there?
I'll leave it.
Okay, all right. Okay, well, unless there are any other thoughts or comments or questions, then can I get a motion to adjourn?
Don't we have a meeting?
Oh, yeah, we got to hold a meeting.
I do have one slide just to update you on schedule just a little bit here. We've got applications due on the 28th of this month for the current funding cycle. We're scheduled to meet again on the 9th, February 9th. We were looking at subcommittee meeting on March 16th and potentially March 23rd, which is the following Wednesday, if needed, depending on the amount of actual applications we do receive. And then those recommendations from the subcommittee would then go to the GAB. I'm proposing the 6th of April, which is 1 week early, but the reason for that is spring break is the following week, and we thought that might be a little difficult to get a quorum, and then also for folks just to be able to attend the meeting due to vacations.
But as usual, we can reply to, I think you should publish this via email and let us reply that way, if that's all right. I'm not really sure about all those dates right now, honestly. But is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay, any other issues?
So the 6th of April is the next scheduled GAB meeting.
No, it's February 9th.
Okay.
And that is largely just these 5-year review topics.
Apropos of that, the county, when you open the screen and go to the website, I noticed that the GAB meetings are never there. Just about every other meeting is there. I don't know if anybody else has noticed that. The diary on the first page, when you look at.
Homepage of the website?
Yeah.
I'm
Planning
not
Commission.
familiar with that, but we'll check into it.
Anyhow.
Okay, is there any other business to discuss? Okay, with that, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, I thought that was a good meeting.
Yeah. Got a lot done.
Yeah. Well, got stuff into the pipeline.
You gonna be able to rotate on the subcommittee this year?
Yeah, I enjoy doing it, but if
You gonna be
somebody
able
else
to rotate
wants
into
to do
the
it,
subcommittee this
we can
year?
step aside.
Whenever the
An
time
appointment,
frame rolls
come
on.
on.
I mean, I'm happy
We
to
might
do
not
it,
let you off.
Yeah.
but I know that a lot of new members and some express interest. I'm happy to.
Yeah.
If it is, I do enjoy doing it. I just wanna make sure if you